Hello and welcome to our HubSpot Hug recording on improving page speed in HubSpot CMS. This is a recording of a previous event that we did for the HubSpot Hug group. We're super excited to have you join us. HubSpot user groups, also known as Hugs, are HubSpot supported community groups that are led by HubSpot partners like us that work to bring the community together to share knowledge, connect with other people, and just get to know other peers in the community. We're really honored and privileged to be selected as the leader of the SEO Hug for this year. And if you sign up and to join our Hug group, you can get invites to events like these. So a little bit about us. My name is Tanya. I'm joined by Missy. We are super passionate about SEO. And HubSpot, they're two of our favorite things. Chronix Digital, we're a HubSpot partner agency, and our roots are in SEO. So you will notice as we go back and forth, Missy is just the best resource for all things technical SEO. And I will dive in with all the things that are super specific to HubSpot. So today we're going to talk about what are core web vitals. How can you assess your website's vitals? We're going to talk a little bit about how this applies to HubSpot specifically, the age-old question of over-optimization and user experience. And then in our live event, we did have a Q&A. And in this event, we're going to touch on some of the common questions that came up in that, but you can always add a comment on this video and we can respond to your questions there. So I'm going to kick it over to you, Missy.
All right. So Search Engine Land has reported after doing studies that less than 15% of all websites meet Google's core web vitals guidelines. That was earlier this year. And, Google has been kind of pushing and tracking core web vitals for the last year or so. And, that 15%, of them meeting that, obviously this is a very small portion of websites. So this leaves a lot of room to be one of those websites and to be able to do better than your competition. So as we said, Google had announced this, that in May of 2021, that they would be using core web vitals as a ranking signal as part of their overall user experience page signals. They actually did launch a little bit later than that over the summer, but they are now a ranking factor. And in order to get the rankings boost, a page must meet all three of the core web vitals that Google has outlined. One thing here, this is one announcement that Google has made early on. They actually pre-announced about a year in advance that they were going to be using a ranking signal. Google never does that really. So this was definitely a unique experience. And I think because it was so involved, they wanted to give websites a chance to make updates and be ready for the ranking signals. So as I think
this is the only time. So I think it's the only time we've had a heads up.
I can't remember any other time. Usually they tell you, hey, by the way, we just made an update. Check that your website didn't get affected.
Yeah, just confirming that there was a rollout.
Exactly. So definitely a unique one here. So as we can see, Google's page experience signals are a number of factors that three of them are part of this, what they call the core web vitals. So core web vitals really measure loading, interactivity, and visual stability of your website. So it's really going to be how the website loads, how you can actually interact with the website, scrolling, clicking on buttons, searching, things like that, and how much it shifts or doesn't shift when you're interacting with the pages. And then in addition to that, Google is using other ranking factors for page experience. They really want websites to have a good experience that really makes the web in general a better place to be, and Google wants to reward those websites. So sites that are mobile friendly, that have safe browsing using HTTPS, as their main protocol, and not having intrusive interstitials are also part of that page experience signals. So most performance issues are going to fall into a couple of categories: rendering the page and loading. Loading performance is going to be how efficient transferring all the files that you need to actually for your web page to view in the user's browser. And then rendering is the efficiency for the browser to actually take everything that was downloaded and display it to the user. So everything has to load on the page, and then it has to actually be shown so the user can actually see it. So the core web vitals, these are the three core web vitals. Largest contentful paint, which they use kind of an acronym there, is going to measure loading. So loading speed, your biggest piece of content on the page. The threshold for good is under 2.5 seconds. First input delay is going to measure how quickly you can interact with the content on the page. This one, needs to be really fast for the good qualification, under 100 milliseconds. And then cumulative layout shift is going to measure visual stability. And this one, it's not really a speed score, it's just kind of a number score. And as Google, measures that, it's under 0.1 as a score there, which is little to no shift when you're scrolling through the pages. So let's look a little bit deeper dive into each of these. Largest contentful paint is going to measure the loading performance of the page. So this is really going to be your biggest piece of content on the page and how much time it takes for that main content to load on a user's screen. So as we said, the goal is to be under 2.5 seconds. You either pass this or you don't. And again, like we said, you do have to pass all 3 core web vitals to get that rankings boost. This is just kind of an example here as we kind of marked that yellow box around. Usually your hero image on the page, or if you have a video, your really largest content on the page, it's kind of usually pretty obvious, but images and videos take up the main content. So that's most of the time going to be your largest content, on each page. So first input delay is going to measure how quickly you can interact on the page. So measures the time it takes between when a user first interacts with the page, such as clicking on a button, clicking in a search bar to actually type in it, and to when the browser actually begins processing that request. So this needs to happen pretty fast, under 100 milliseconds. As we can kind of see in this example here, when you are able to type in that search bar on the top there, that is what is measured as the first input delay. So if you try to click on that, or click on a button and nothing happens, that page isn't fully loaded, and that first input delay isn't ready, so it's not going to be measured until you can actually interact with the page. And then cumulative layout shift measures visual stability. So this score is related to how much or how little your page actually shifts or jumps unexpectedly as you scroll or interact with the page. You'll probably notice this a lot on mobile, that you see that you're scrolling through, maybe an ad pops up, and all of a sudden the content shifts up or down, and either you accidentally click on a button, or you click on an ad accidentally. It's not a good user experience if it jumps like that and you kind of lose your place in where you're reading. And so this is pretty important for not to shift, and for everything to kind of stay in the same modules throughout the site. So again, this is a score, and really the 0.1 score is little to no shifts on the page. But that's kind of Google's, like I said, they have a score. So it's harder to, measure yourself, but you can always use, certain tools to measure that for you.
And this example here with the button is a really good one for HubSpot sites, because if you're using the HubSpot CTAs, often they are a little bit slow to load on the page. So having those CTAs load just a little bit later will give you that layout shift that you're working so hard to optimize to eliminate.
Yeah. And this is a great example here, as this animation shows, especially when you're when you have an e-commerce site or any order, that you can place on the site. If you don't mean to click, if you want to go back and it shifts down and all of a sudden you've ordered and submitted an order, that obviously is a very bad user experience. If you're ordering, as in this example, 56 items and you weren't really ready to do that. So, pretty important. This is probably the worst case scenario of that. Clicking on an ad, you can at least go back, but you definitely don't want people unexpectedly clicking on things, and that obviously adds a layer of issues for your company if you're people are submitting orders and they didn't want to.
I think we've all experienced this one at one point or another. I actually had this today, making some edits on a WordPress site, and I went to click a button to edit it, but all of the plugin pop-ups showed up and I ended up losing all the work that I had worked on.
Oh,
not quite the same as placing an order I didn't want, but still frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you can actually measure the core web vitals in a number of tools. PageSpeed Insights allows you to measure that. That's Google's PageSpeed Insights. Chrome UX Report. Search Console is probably one of the best ways that you can see all your pages, or at least all your pages that have enough traffic to measure that. So you can get a good look at each page, or, all the pages as a whole, to see how many have passed and, where your issues are in kind of a bulk experience. That helps with templates, especially if you have templates that are kind of affecting that, which ones to edit. And then Chrome DevTools, Lighthouse is another one. Chrome DevTools and Lighthouse, the only caveat there is they aren't able to measure first input delay, because that does require an interaction on the page. And so they're not getting, actual user tests. So instead of that, you can kind of get a gauge of whether you would pass that first input delay with those two tools, using total blocking time, which is another, metric that they use in those tools. So those are very helpful if you have a new website that's in development and you're not going to be able to use some of these other tools, to be able to track everything. And the last one is the Web Vitals extension. So for Chrome, you can add that extension and measure that throughout the site. So lots of options there. Enable, and if you need to test your website and get that information.
So now, because this is a HubSpot user group, I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into how does this really apply to your HubSpot CMS? So there's a few things that we can do, but it's really good to take a step back and really think about strategically how you're going to approach this. So there's the PRPL approach, which is pushing and preloading the most important resources, rendering the initial route as soon as possible, pre-cache remaining assets, and use your cache to help speed up page load time where you can, and then lazy load everything else. So make sure all your important stuff comes up first, and then anything that isn't super important, just hold it back a little bit, and then your page completes that initial load and then adds in the additional resources. But that said, as you optimize one thing, it can optimize against another. So if you have too many things lazy loading, that might speed up your page speed, but it might increase how much shift you have on the page. So you really need to tweak and balance and put that user experience first. One of the things that can really slow down your site is your chat bot. HubSpot chat isn't as much of a drain as some of the other chat tools, but it's also not the lightest chat tool out there, and it can delay your total page load time. So one easy way around that is to just delay the chat. So have your page load, then load the chat. So you can either set that with a time on page delay, which is what we have set up here in this example, and just say, wait 5 seconds before the chat pops up, or you can set it for a certain amount of page scroll or have it pop up on exit intent. A lot of times people coming to a page don't want to use the chat anyway right away. It's not until they can't find what they're looking for that they then want to use the chat. So just think about user intent. Turn chat off on pages where you don't actually need it. So if you have a landing page where you're driving form submissions, your chat could actually be detrimental to that conversion rate optimization. So turning that off there speeds up your page speed and helps to increase your conversion rate. Deferring your HubSpot forms. So if you have your HubSpot CMS with HubSpot Forms, everything will load, as it should. But if you are I'm going to start that again. If you're using your HubSpot Forms on your HubSpot CMS, you have a lot of different pieces going on that are speaking to each other, and that can delay your page load speed, which seems a little bit ironic because they should all speak together nice and fluently. But what we've actually found is that if you are using really heavy HubSpot forms that are slowing things down, not using the native integration and using the HubSpot Forms API to load your forms can actually speed things up quite a bit, especially on mobile. Images, I'd say that Missy and I agree that images are the most common issue when it comes to core web vitals. Images are always a pain. And it's so easy with your HubSpot site to just upload images as they come. Maybe you download it on Unsplash or Pixabay or somewhere else, and it's a huge image that could be used for a billboard, which is such great resolution. And then you just upload it to your page as is. That's going to kill your page speed, and it's just going to kill the overall, bandwidth and everything that's going on. So always make sure that you resize your images before you add them to your CMS. And just a good tool as well is use something like Tiny Ping or Tiny JPEG, which can help compress the image, based on the file type. Resize your images for where they're going to be on the page. So if you have a nice big hero image and then you're using that same image as a thumbnail, just resize it and upload it again in that thumbnail size so that you're not relying on your browser or your CMS to do all the resizing and show big images in little spaces.
Yeah, because still those big images have to load on the page first as the large image and then resize. So you're just kind of wasting time to reload those.
Yeah. And anything that is, if you have a lot of big images, big photo galleries, good, really cool videos, you might not need to load them all right away. Use lazy load. And most of the time, lazy load images still load up pretty quickly because it allows the rest of your page to load even quicker. So your HubSpot, you can see in the little GIF that's going here, your HubSpot module by default has lazy loading as an option built into it if you're using the right image module. If not, switch your module out. So just using that can help things quite a bit, especially with those background videos. Oh, same with video. This is what we were just saying. Video as a background on your hero can be so impactful and look really cool, but it can really slow things down, especially on mobile. So with background videos and with videos across your site, really think about that mobile experience. If you are, say you're waiting for the bus and you're out using your data plan, that video loading is going to be slow. It's going to use use all your data time and just be a poor user experience. So delay that on mobile or swap it with an image instead. You can see in the screenshot here, you can swap if you want your background to be different on mobile or desktop. With video, hosting it on YouTube or Vimeo is another good way to keep your page a little bit lighter, because you're not hosting the entire thing, you're just embedding the call code. Don't autoplay if you don't need to. Especially don't have audio on your autoplay video. That's something most people are on board with now, but it still happens. You come across that one site and you have to like frantically turn down your audio really quick. So just be courteous to your visitor and handle that as well. So video can be super cool, but really use it with caution and think of the alternatives on how you can improve your page speed experience, your page speed and your page experience. The page shift. Lazy load helps to speed up your page speed, but lazy load can contribute to that shift after. So you want to think about what resources you're using. So if you are using, think of some HubSpot examples. Your CTA buttons can shift your page if they're a little bit slow to load. If you have a big image or big video that comes and takes over, that's lazy loading, that can shift it. If you have smart content, and if your smart content is, shifting once it hits whatever rules it needs to shift it, that can impact it as well. So always make sure that you're viewing your page with all of those different rules applied. Check it on mobile, check it on desktop, check your smart content in real life, and don't just rely on, it works for you, it works for someone else. It's also a really good idea to include your size attributes or your CSS aspect ratios in your page layout. Sometimes you'll see on a website, it'll just be like a blank spot and it'll say advertisement here. That is weird when you see it, but it's actually really good at preventing that page shift, because it's saying, this is our section for our ad, this is how big it is, and it's always going to be this big. So it is preventing the page from increasing or decreasing when that content loads. So that's another one where you're going to want to assess your user experience with your page shift, which comes down to that age-old balance. If you're optimizing to pass your core web vitals and get the ultimate, core web vitals score, but the things you're putting in place makes your page look weird or makes the user experience a little less intuitive, or hurts your conversion rate, maybe you shouldn't do it. So always think about that. Chasing that green dot of a pass is not always the gold standard.
But most of the time, the core web vitals and the user experience is part of page experience. So the goal is to improve user experience, and that is really the bottom line. So most of the time you are going to see, if you do pass these, that you are passing the, improving user experience, but really it is the user experience that is the goal. Because if you have a good user experience on your website, users are going to stay there and they're going to interact with your website and, convert, as opposed to just bouncing because it's taking too long to load, or, things are shifting as they're scrolling through your page. So that's always important to consider, is that user experience is the reason for these core web vital rankings.
Yeah, and really assessing page by page can help too. So if you have a nice big hero banner with a huge video, but it's on the contact page, you might not need that. If people coming to the contact page all they want is your phone number, and then they leave, you probably don't need to add those things anyway. So you can, solve several problems at once by improving user experience and improving your web vitals and improving, the shift, just by keeping some pages just nice and simple.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point there, Tanya, that one thing to note is that it isn't an all or nothing for your whole site. Each page is measured individually for whether they pass core web vitals or not. So considering, your important pages, those are the ones that you really want to focus on first, at least, and you can help prioritize that way. But it is really on a page by page basis.
Totally. And, you don't need to freak out if you have that super large photo gallery. which has a terrible score, but is an important part of your, sales process, it doesn't matter if that page specifically doesn't perform as well, because that's a secondary piece. That's not your key traffic driving page. So Q&A. In our live session, we had many really good questions. Our emails are here as well. And you can find Missy and I on, Twitter. You can follow Chronix on Twitter. So let's ask some of these questions. Missy, how can you improve your core web vitals if you don't have a web developer on your team?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously a lot of smaller websites or smaller companies don't have those extra resources. The biggest thing to look at, as we talk about, images are almost, I would say, almost number one thing that, especially for the largest contentful paint, those are easy to spot and easy to detect, what the sizes are. You go into your, HubSpot media and identify how large that image is. That's probably one of the number one things to look at. As Tanya had displayed, lazy loading and setting that. Those are easy. HubSpot has a lot of tools to allow you to turn on and off certain features and to view how big your images are. Also, as Tanya mentioned, looking at what pages are important to have a large image or even, multiple images of loading on the page. Really just kind of considering that experience. There's a lot of really easy to use tools in HubSpot that allow you to kind of just select and use drop downs to pick, what is the most important there. Any plugins that you're using, making sure that you're not running any plugins that you maybe used to use and then are using someone else, that you actually turn those off, because that code does still have to load on the page if it's still, active, even if you're not using it. So, making sure those things, aren't active and that you, remove any of those, that will help to, improve, overall speed, and also, possibly just even like the first input delay, that's going to improve that. And then I know, Tanya, you want to talk a little bit more about the cumulative layout shift and how you can maybe improve that.
Yeah, I wanted to stick on this topic of codes though. What do you think about using Google Tag Manager? Would using Google Tag Manager to manage like your tracking codes and pixels, do you think that would make an impact on core web vitals?
Yeah, definitely not having multiple single pixels, loaded directly on the page. When you're going through Google Tag Manager, you're basically connecting to one source and then loading the necessary pixels, and code on the page. So that, I think is really helpful to use kind of a single source to load, the right code.
Yeah, and I know the question that was asked to us was about if you don't have a web developer. But one thing I've seen with HubSpot CMS that you do want to have a good developer on is the difference between having your JavaScript and your CSS in just one giant style sheet record versus having those different codes in your modules and then only loading the codes that are needed for each module and doing it at that level, and having your template and your theme have the master list can really help speed things up as well. We've seen some of the older HubSpot templates in the marketplace that just have this like archaic style sheets record that's really, really slowing down mobile page speed. So if you do have a good HubSpot developer in there, just to make sure your modules are clean and that you have all your modules in a theme for your website, can speed things up quite a bit too.
Yeah, and if you have a limited budget, there are things that you can do on your own, try to fix all the images, the things that might be tedious if you need to, re-upload a bunch of images and select lazy loading and things like that. And take a look at your plugins. Those might be things that you can do on your own, and then hire a developer for the things that are, a little bit more complicated. It, will save you if you have a limited budget, but it is definitely going to help to make a better user experience overall if you invest in that.
Yeah. Another question we had was about desktop versus mobile. The person in our session said, I get a ton of desktop traffic. We're doing really well on desktop. Do I even need to worry about these? Because a lot of the concerns seem to be about mobile experience.
Yeah, and that one, it definitely depends on, and you can kind of look at your traffic to see, how high desktop and mobile are. With mobile first indexing, mobile is pretty important. So I wouldn't necessarily ignore mobile and just discount that as not important just because it isn't right now, the majority of your traffic. Mobile is becoming more and more important, especially as we're more remote and people are kind of working on the go. That could definitely increase. So I wouldn't definitely ignore that. However, if you're kind of prioritizing, probably looking at desktop and the pages that might not pass on desktop as your first priority, if you do have the majority of your traffic on desktop, I think that's kind of okay to focus on that as your priority, and maybe look at mobile a little after if you really have to prioritize accordingly.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point that the mobile first indexing is something that we really need to be aware of. Even if our traffic comes mostly on desktop, Google's looking at that first and using that for a lot of the rankings. So, your traffic might be primarily desktop, but if you want to rank well on desktop, you still need to have that mobile consideration.
Yep.
Yeah. For cumulative layout shift, we talked a little bit about lazy load, CTAs, and smart content. The best way to assess those is to just test it. Test your pages with and without certain elements. You can run them through the tools. We have a website grader that you can use as well that'll tell you if you have any issues on your site that are slowing it down, and I'll put a link to that in the video description. But it's really about running the tests and seeing what's slowing your page down and what's causing that shift and what isn't, so that you can sort it out. Because the lazy load can contribute to shift, but it doesn't always contribute to shift. And same with the CTAs. So you really just want to spot check that and have it top of mind. If you are having an issue, or if you're seeing your CLS scores being quite low, those are the key culprits. So check those out. Same if you are a publisher and you're using Google AdSense, those loading and not loading will change your page layout as well. So keep an eye on those and any third-party assets that you have loading.
Yeah. And I would say the biggest thing to do first is, especially with images, is compress and convert images. So if you have PNGs that don't need transparency, that don't have like a transparent background, and don't really have a need to be PNGs, you can convert those to JPEGs, and making sure to compress to the point of that it's still good quality. Lossless compression. Those are going to be your first steps, and then you can kind of decide if you pass. You probably don't necessarily need to add lazy loading, especially for your main images above the fold. Those are usually your first things to do anyway. And then you don't have to unnecessarily use it. And then you don't have to worry about the cumulative layout shift in a lot of cases. So that would, I would say, do that first, and don't just use lazy loading as your safeguard to loading images fast.
Yeah, and it's a good point about with the fold too, is anything below the fold isn't really going to shift by the time the user gets there. So if you ensure that top of page loads fine, if you have things that shift the page a little bit at the bottom, there's not really anything to shift, right? So if your form on the bottom is this long, but sometimes it switches and it's this long, it's just the footer moving. So that's actually very little impact on the user to have that shift. So put your variable content near the bottom.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions you think people might be interested in with this one?
One question that people did have was, how important are the core web vitals? If, you have some sites that you feel like, they're pretty fast, but you're not necessarily meeting the core web vitals, should you really focus on trying to make improvements to meet them? I think my answer to that would be, even though only 15% of sites right now have met core web vitals, this is a chance to really, beat your competitors. You get a rankings boost for meeting all core web vitals for each of your pages. So especially your most important pages that people are visiting, your high converting pages, the ones that you want to rank highest, in Google. Those are the ones I would probably focus on and, really try to have an advantage against your competition, because even though maybe everybody, some of your competitors aren't beating that now, they could be in a couple months. I know some people are still behind in, ranking for that, or didn't necessarily take it seriously, even though Google told us to, for a change here. But I think really this is really your chance to kind of outshine and get that ranking boost before them.
It's always easier to maintain a competitive advantage than to
Definitely.
race to catch up and try to bump somebody else out of that top spot.
Yeah.
Well, that's all our time for today. So big thank you to everyone watching this video. Please be sure to sign up for our SEO Hug group. Make sure you follow us on social so that you know when our next events are. And always drop in your questions or send us an email, and we are happy to talk SEO and HubSpot all day. Thank you for watching.
All right. Thank you.